Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
I am on to you, sir. Yeah, wait a second indeed. No thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the MuseCast. That sneaky shyster there is Dan Kent. I am Shawna Boren, and I'm just trying to do my job. And this man is trying to trick me. He's like, wait a second. Nope, I will not.
I can't get away with anything anymore. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Dan Kent, you have on a different hoodie today. Like, what's going on?
Well, you know, I wear this kind of corduroy brown. You've seen it, the corduroy brown thing. And I love that because it's got texture and it just it helps calm me, and I like that the tactile kind of feel of it. But it has some sewing that is needed. It's from like 1968, so it's like this really old thing, you know. I got it for $2 at Goodwill, and but it needs some work right now. So it's in the shop getting repaired, but it should be back, I hope. So
good deal. It needs some mending, but it's getting its repairs. Well, that's good.
Right.
And in the meantime, we've got this little navy light grayish hoodie.
Just a hoodie.
Not light gray, but yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm a little Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't get me because I'm a little discombobulated this morning. But I think my brain is, no matter how scattered I am, I'm attuned to your shenanigans. So I was ready. I was ready for you.
That's I don't get away with anything anymore. So
that's right. Yeah. That's right. So this past weekend, I'm just trying to like reorient myself because I was off. This is the time of year, you know, I've got a graduating senior and then 2 other kids, and then my college sophomore is home. And so this is the time of year where there's just a lot going on in the home life. And so I had the weekend off, which was lovely. And so I'm still like playing catch up from that. And then we have this big Jesus Collective gathering coming up this weekend that we hope that you guys can be a part of. And so there's just a lot to do with that. So I'm a little woo. So I need you to bring me to here, bring me to Woodland Hills land and the amazing conversation between Greg and Bill, who is just like the sweetest grandpa that I could just sit and listen to, because his voice is soothing, his rationale, you know, seems to be helpful. And so, yeah, I would love for you. I don't know how you do a summary on a discussion. So I'm going to say, if it's a summary, great. However, what I need from you, Dan Kent, is just to bring, catch me up. What happened? Because I was not there.
Yeah. Well, it was fantastic. I mean, it was so great. And I agree with you. It's like really listening to Greg and Bill talk about anything would be entertaining because they both just have so much wisdom, and it's not just you know, life wisdom. It's like it's learned wisdom. It's that mix between, you know, the ivory tower knowledge, but with like street smarts, and just a really great mix of intellectual depth, but also life experience. And the people who get that, the people who see the treasure there, I think they were just fixated on it. And I mean, I couldn't take my eyes off it. It was great to see it and be a part of it. And I just, it was one of those conversations that, you know, it's too bad that it's only 40 minutes. I mean, it could go for another hour and it would be entertaining to me. But yeah, so it was really great too, because Bill Doherty, he talked about Braver Angels, which is the kind of the service that he does with, you know, trying to get people who are at odds with one another, or who disagree with one another, who might even be hostile toward one another, to get those people to move toward peace with one another. And that's sort of what his organization, Braver Angels, does. So definitely talked a lot about that. And Greg kind of noted just the overall Christ-like kingdom spirit of peacemaking that whole organization embodies. And it, you know, it felt good to have Woodland Hills give attention to that, and to Bill, of course, too, because there is just so much attention that goes to the crisis entrepreneurs, to use Bill's word from last summer, these conflict profiteers, capitalists, and the people who are all about divide and conquer, and so much attention goes to them, and it's so good to see or to allow attention to go toward an organization that is going in the opposite direction and trying to get people to listen and connect. So I was very grateful that Woodland Hills was able to provide that. But then my favorite part is Bill kind of talked about his testimony, just how, he's in his 70s, he's almost 80, and just how he, I'm sure he doesn't like everybody talking about how old he is, but he's great. I mean, it's great that he's the age that he is. He's the perfect age, is what I'm saying, because, especially in a culture that's just so preoccupied with what young people are thinking, and the nuns and all of the people moving away from the church. And here's a guy who's gone through this long journey and has been seeking God, and now he has found these truths at this stage of his life. I just think it should, if people are sensitive to it, it should give people a role model of the kind of what it looks like to intelligently seek God, to intelligently open your heart to what God might do in your heart. Because he talked about other church experiences that he's had where he felt like he's had to leave his brain at the door when he goes in. And so they have a lot of heart stuff, but it's not intellectually coherent. And so he was able at Woodland Hills and some of his other connections to find something that both fed his heart and was also intellectually coherent, or at least intellectually coherent enough for him to ground his faith. And it was such a joy to listen to him talk about, the practical, personal kind of benefit of that. And he talked about how he just missed Jesus, because here's a guy who, decades ago was, in seminary, and in pursuing intellectual pursuits, he sort of lost that personal connection with Jesus. And he just he confessed on stage just how great that felt to have that personal connection with Jesus again. And he noted this kind of idea that he was seeing in the scripture about how Jesus called the disciples to follow me, not to necessarily obey me, not to necessarily believe me, although ultimately you have to believe in Jesus, but at the start, just follow me as a person, to follow me and be with me. And that really kind of circumvented a lot of the intellectual traps that people like Bill and myself and Greg and you and other people can fall into. And I just thought that was very beautiful. And then he talked about the work that he does, which is trying to get people to reconcile and trying to get people to listen to one another. And he talked about, this was interesting. He said that, in his work with people in Washington and these politicians, he said that right now people in Washington, they're hurting. That is, they don't want this strife. They don't want this animosity. They don't want these silos. They want to be able to work with other politicians to get things done. But there's just this rancor there that is keeping that from happening. And he said in his experience, the politicians don't like that. And that was comforting to me, because sometimes I feel like they do. And so it was good to hear that, no, that they don't like it any more than we do. And then he shared, Greg kind of pushed him, could you give us some practical advice on how to reconcile with family members and friends or whatever. And he talked about the 4 horsemen of polarization, is what he called it. And I thought this was really helpful, and it's appropriate because we're going into this Revelation series pretty soon, and we'll be talking about the 4 horsemen in the book of Revelation. But he said these 4 kind of prominent what would you call these habits, I guess you could say, these 4 habits that tend to be very toxic and tend to sabotage peacemaking. He said the first one is stereotyping, and that's just like, oh, you're just that's just a Democrat. You're a socialist, or you're a Pelagian, or whatever it could be. That's kind of what a stereotyping is. Dismissing, like, oh, you don't have to listen to him, or that's just not important, or whatever. However, you can dismiss, ridiculing the other person, and that we see a lot of in the memes that we create on social media. And I feel like we're all learning these skills that are very toxic and bad. We're getting really good at creating memes that are ridiculing and belittling of others. And it's not a good skill to learn. And then finally, having contempt. And that really kind of is the fruit of the first three, I think, is where you just have this contempt where like this other person is just beneath you. They're not even fully human and all that kind of feeling. And then Greg pressed them just a little bit more and said, what do you do in your family when you've got people who are so fixed in their mindset that it's really hard to even connect with them? And he just offered two pieces of advice that I thought were really valuable. The first one is, just let go of this assumption that you can change their mind. Just assume that you will never be able to change their mind. And I think that that's a good place to start. And it's also very liberating, because there's a lot of pressure when you're trying to change them and get them to think right or whatever. You can just put all of that aside and just be with them as they are. And the more you can be with people as they are, the less of that toxicity you're going to feel in yourself. And the second part is very related to that. And he just says that you need to first connect with people before you start talking about viewpoints and stuff like that. And the way, this is my own words on that, is you just need to trigger their dignity. You need to activate their humanity. You need to be with them as a person and let them know that their humanity and their dignity is respected before you can even start to talk about, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? And yeah, so that's sort of my summary. And were you able to see it at all?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
I did. I watched it this morning in preparing for MuseCast, and I definitely feel like it's something I want to watch again, because I know there were a few things I want to go back and listen to. There were a couple of things I was like, dadgummit, he got me there. Like, I kind of was assuming, this will be great. Like, I can just listen to this conversation, get ready for this show, blah, blah. And then it's like, I found myself sitting down going, wait, what? I wasn't looking to be challenged in this sweet little conversation. And that sounds condescending. I don't mean it to be. Because I really value Bill, and I am so appreciative of what he brings to the table. And the fact that he's a part of our community is just a gift. At the end there, when you were talking about his 2 points about if you're engaging with like family members or friends, and just his two like pieces of advice, I thought were really great. And he used an example, and I can't remember exactly how he worded it, but he talked about how someone had said to him when they had gone through this process with people from the other side, whatever that looks like, that they said something along the lines of, once you get to know the heart of a person, it's much harder to like fight against them. Like and I think we've said that a ton. It's like proximity is huge. Like, it's one thing to fight ideas and ideologies and just, but like, do you know a person in the midst of whatever it is that you're combating? I think it definitely shines a different perspective and a different light, which I thought was great. I think proximity is huge. So with that, I say that I was appreciative of the conversation. Definitely need to re-listen, because like I said, there were some things that I was like, that one's a bit hard for me. I loved the 4 behaviors, the four horsemen. I thought that was great. And I was convicted on the dismissing one, because I think that's kind of where I get sometimes when I just, I maybe through experience and time, and maybe through intuition, a combination of things, you just get to a point where you're like, this is not going to benefit anyone. So therefore, I'm not even going to have this conversation. And so I need to be careful of that. I think there's a time and a place for that, but I also just don't need to assume that I can just dismiss folks. And then I love when he talked about, when Jesus talks about agape love and loving one another, he doesn't mean love with disdain. And are you kidding me, man? Like, can I just say, God loves everyone, therefore I love everyone, and then just leave it at that. No, because if there's disdain there, and if there's any amount of contempt, if there's no understanding at the base of it all, then I'm not doing what God has called me to do. So I was really appreciative of that. I saw some comments on YouTube that were really appreciative of the conversation. But then we did get in a couple of questions, which I think is great. I think people hear something like this and they're going to have a few different responses. And I think that's why we're here, is to have those conversations. And then I will end by saying I was really appreciative of Bill just sharing a piece of his story, how he came back to Jesus. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew kind of on the periphery some of that, but I didn't know that he was studying to be a priest, and that he's a theologian, and his walking away. I knew he was a universalist and had been seeking. So it was just really beautiful for him to be able to share that and to hear that and to learn from that. And just to see someone who is intelligent, who is definitely, he's been successful in his field, to still have a posture of learning and being open to discovery and the new things of God. Like that was just, I love it. May we all.
That's really well said, because that's kind of the way I feel as I was thinking about it, is I just feel like it's so great having Bill here, because, it's, for me, like I've always looked up to Greg and Paul, and I consider them mentors, and but you can never have too many mentors, and it's so great when it's kind of like you get a new mentor on your shelf. It's like so I feel like I have a new mentor on my shelf. I love having Bill as just a role model. I don't know about a mentor, but definitely a role model. And it's what a blessing that he is to our congregation. And
is. He really is. And I want to say too, I really was appreciative, because it can feel very like afar off. It can feel very like get along and accept people and blah, blah, blah. But he kind of got to some pretty practical parts of this, like dealing with people you interact with. It's one thing to say, deal with people on the other side of the aisle. And I know, like we are, we're Anabaptist-ish. And so we're not trying to lean into the politics of things. However, it's a reality, and it is all around us, and it has an impact. And so we would be foolish to think that it doesn't. And so I was really appreciative of just the fact that he said that not everything is a debate for you. Right. Like if you are a person who had family, who were, who went through the Holocaust, or like that's not every debate is for you. And so just the wisdom in that I thought was great, and how to deal with situations, and just the ground rules of coming together. Because I think sometimes it gets lost in this, like, just you think what you think and I'll think what I think, and we'll respect one another at a distance. I thought that was really, really good.
Well, and as you're talking to Shawna, it really shows me the density, and I don't mean that in the negative way, I mean that in the positive way. Right, I mean, that conversation was very dense, because you've brought up like 3 things I totally forgot about that are just so wise and so helpful. And part of it is like the conversation was pleasant. So there was like this pleasant density about it. And what a great moment for the church. It was a great sermon discussion, I guess.
Absolutely. But, absolutely. So with that, and I love that density. What'd you say?
Pleasant density.
Density. I like that. With that, I do want to hit our 2 questions, because I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts, because I'm not sure what my thoughts are off the top of my head. But the first question, these both came from the same person. We started this series with a message about the perils of relativism and the importance of making truth claims. Now this week, it's cool if we each have our own facts. If at least one of us has low social trust, what's up with that? So that's the first question. And then secondly, it seems like relativism is bad because it's hippies, but we need to be delicate about low social trust because it's conservative white people. Isn't that the subtext? So
Well, I mean,
the response.
They might be related, the questions. First of all, it's a really great question. I love questions where you said this over here, but then now you're saying this, and those seem like their intention. And that's really, really good thinking and good listening. I love the careful listening that question sort of reveals. Because that's how we learn. We follow one thing and then we follow another, and then somebody says those two, one of those has to go, or something needs to change here, and that's how we grow and learn. And so it's really I really appreciate that question. I think in this case, the first part, we're teaching that relativism. I wouldn't say that relativism is bad. First of all, I just think that it's incoherent. That's what I would say. And so it's bad to the extent that believing incoherent things is bad. Like, for instance, you could tell this right away. Even the claim relativism is true can't be true if relativism is true. And so to live in an incoherent worldview like that, it's just not wise to do that. The second part of that is okay. So I absolutely think that we should seek actual absolute truths, and we should be orienting ourselves toward absolute truths, because relativism is incoherent. So there has to be some truths there. Now, how do you actually relate with other people? Well, just because you're pursuing this absolute truth, they might not be where you're at there. They might have found something else that they think is absolutely true. And they might be wrong, but you might be wrong also. And so the low social trust thing is really just pragmatic. It's really just about how do I have a conversation with this person? How do I have a relationship with this person, even though we so fundamentally disagree on these absolute truths, or maybe relativist truths, whatever the case may be. And so what we're saying about the low social trust is that in order to have a relationship with somebody, you need to first trust and have trust from them, and you need to trust them. And so developing that trust is the most kind of foundational part of actually having any hope of either being corrected or correcting them. And so on one hand, there's the personal ideal, which is, you should be seeking absolute truths, because relativism is incoherent. But how you seek those truths in community requires you to first focus on social trust before you focus on your disagreements or agreements on the intellectual stuff. And then what was the second question?
It seems like relativism is bad because it's hippies.
Oh.
It makes me chuckle.
Yeah. I'm thinking like in the 90s on South Park, Cartman just hated hippies.
Yeah.
It always makes me laugh. Just how much he loathed hippies. I love hippies. I have a lot of hippies in my circle of friends and network, and so I don't think it's that. And the social trust thing, I don't think that's a conservative thing either. I think social trust is important for everybody. If you're going to have any type, especially if you're in a commune of hippies, especially if you're, in relativism where intellectually all truths are relative, well, you better have some other type of foundation, because you can't have a foundation on something that's relative. You need to have a foundation on something that's stronger. So I would say the social trust piece is even more important for a person who would be a relativist. And so I don't think it's a hippie versus conservative thing, though I appreciate that impulse to assume that. I just don't think it's the case. So
yeah, I just thank you for sending the question. And like Dan said, just the idea that you're hearing, you're thinking, you're like, wait a second, is this like, are we switching gears here? What's up with that? And so I love it. I love it that people feel the freedom and know that we welcome that kind of discussion here. So like I said, I still don't have answers because I'm still wrapping my head around everything. I do know that that social trust piece, it's pretty important if we hope to gain any traction. And I do know that also takes wisdom. Like, I don't know that everyone is trustworthy.
Right.
In that context. And so, I think there is more to this discussion than we have space for. Just like with the dense conversation that Greg and Bill had, I feel like while there was a lot that was said, there is so much more that could have been said had we had an afternoon to just sit and talk, but that's just not the way it works during a service. So
that's a really good point. Yeah, I think there is a lot more to it. You know, even like thinking about like, it's so fun to listen to Paul and Greg kind of banter back and forth about the things they disagree about. And it's fun because you know that they have this trust for one another and this relationship with one another that transcends the disagreements on these theological issues. Without that foundation, those kinds of debates take on a very different tone. They're not as much fun. They're not joyful at all. But when you have that relationship and that trust, man, even disagreements are fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely changes the whole landscape of the conversation if that trust is there, because you're not so heavily reliant upon trying to convince one another.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. Like, like the relationship isn't held in the balance of us trying to convince one another, hopefully. Right. Like, go ahead. What were we going to say?
Oh, just a quick disclaimer. That doesn't mean that all disagreements are fun. Some of the disagreements are about very important things, and I don't want to imply that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Before, I know you have a devotional piece that you wanted to share. So I'm excited about that. Is that technically that's your nugget?
It's going to be my nugget.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, good. I do want to just ask you, Dan, you know, if we brought out our bingo card, we would see all the various careers and things that Dan has done in his life. But one of the things that I always kind of like tap back into is your role in dealing with people, whether in the therapy world or in the pastoral world or, you know, whatever. You've dealt with people. And so I'm wondering, how would you answer that question of, you know, whether it's a family gathering or, you know, people that you know? Okay, these are people that you're in relationship with. How do we get beyond some pretty big divides that seem to be separating us? Because like Bill said, the percentage is pretty high of folks who are disconnected from family members. And it is sad that it seems to be political. But again, that is the reality. And some of it is dangerous. Some of this, whatever you think, some of the stuff that's being talked about and thrown about and actions being taken, you know, from all around, it's dangerous. And people's lives are hanging in the balance. And so how can we practice this? Like, what would you say to folks that they're like, this is tough and this is like in my backyard and I'm not sure how to deal with it and how to move forward in kingdom love?
Yeah. Well, there are endless potential examples. And so the risk of answering a question like this is that there's always going to be a, well, what about kind of thing. And so the first thing I would say is that you should, no matter what, you should always, to the best of your ability, stay unified or stay in relationship if you can. Now, if it's regarding a person who has hurt you, that relationship might be an arm's length behind a wall in another state. But to the best of your ability, stay connected. If that's not possible because you've been hurt or whatever, that's understandable, and you need to take care of yourself for sure and be safe. But when it comes to like political issues, I do think that here's what I would say is that I remember like I started to notice this in the 2000s when George Bush was president, and just like some of the, like when George Bush was running for the second time, some of the claims that the Democrats were making that if George Bush gets elected again, there will be nuclear war. And just like that type of, this is how important it is that George Bush not get elected. Well, George Bush got elected. There was no nuclear war or whatever. Then Obama got elected. And then I started to hear from the right, like good friends of mine who I think are pretty rational, saying that he was going to tank the economy and that there was going to be, you know, we would have an immigration problem. And within 5 years, the country will shut down. It's just like these really ridiculous claims about what's going to happen. And, you know, Obama was president and it went pretty well, you know, so and then of course Trump happened and you know, people have very animated feelings about Trump, and he, you know, the January 6th thing was a big thing, but the fact is that we just there's always these ups and downs politically, and I hope that people, when they make these bombastic claims and their fear kind of spurts from them like this little anxiety volcano, it's really good to have people around you, first of all, because it's more comforting that way. But also, it's also good to have people around to say, look at this thing that you were afraid of in 2009. Notice how none of that came about. And now you're making these claims now. And so how much of these claims now should we really be worried about given the claims then? And so we need to have like relationships that transcend time to help us grow throughout these ups and downs that the country goes through. And when we have political opinions, the political opinions are about what's going on now, but that changes so much and it goes all over the place. And so I just think that Bill Doherty's comments are just so important, that you need to develop that trust with one another. You need to be connected with people so that you can both learn from one another in these ups and downs. Whether you're on the left or the right, we need to do better at being connected as people and being open to being teachable and being open to being wrong and being in this culture now. You cannot be wrong. Being wrong is death. And that's upside down. That's not sustainable, because in order for there to be growth, you have to be wrong. You have to learn from mistakes. Yeah. That's the only way to grow. And so I just think that Bill Doherty, I keep coming back to that. You need to start with trust. You need to start with that connection before you even deal with any of these other things. And that'll never happen in one-off moments. It takes time. It takes, you have to tolerate people. You have to tolerate family members sometimes for maybe years, where they might be on a Monica Lewinsky kick, where they're just, Bill Clinton is the devil. And my grandpa was like that. I remember my grandpa on his deathbed was showing me these verses in the book of Psalms saying that, do you know who that is? And talking about this horrible person. He's like, that's Bill Clinton. I'm just what? It's Bill Clinton. I mean, he was like on his deathbed and he was harboring this animosity and contempt for the president, somebody who he is 6,000 levels removed from, who he could never even affect in any way whatsoever. Yet that person on the planet Mars was affecting his mood as he was in his last days. I mean, that is just, it's so sad that we give in to this type of slavery, to these attitudes that we have about people that we aren't even in our circle of relationship. And so it's so important, I think, to just lean into the people that you are in relationship with and care more about them than people who, powers and principalities that you just don't have the say-so over. Now, if you do have say-so over and you do have an influence, well, that's a different question. Now you have to ask more complicated questions about what you're going to do with that. But for most people in family relationships and stuff like that, I think that the best thing to do is to just be unified, to just be in relationship, even if you don't like the person, even if they bother you, as long as it's safe. Psychologically, as long as it's safe, because it's only in that long-term sort of loyal type of relationship that you can have any hope of learning from one another. People have to be open to it. People have to be teachable, but there's no hope outside of that kind of longer-term connection.
That's good, Dan. I'm going to segue into nugget time, and I'm going to go first because it kind of ties into what you were just saying and how we want to close out the show. And so, so nugget time, here it is. I think, I think we have to remember that there are people and groups and corporations, like there's all these others like outside of our circle that really benefit when we get riled up and start like lobbing shots, and so I would say get from behind the screen, get from behind your keyboard, like interact with people, because as you begin to learn the hearts of people, sometimes your perspective changes. I'm not saying be willy-nilly about your belief system. I'm not saying, go where the wind blows, but I am saying that when you encounter the heart of another person, it makes it a little bit harder. Like Bill said, it makes it a little bit harder to have such disdain for them. If you can understand who they are and their story and what it is that is causing them to think the way that they think. And I also just think it's important, like if you are dealing with, your people, your community, those you're in a relationship with, something that Scott, I remember said, like we talked about years ago, he was like, there's a sphere of concern versus a sphere of influence. And our sphere of concern can seem really large, but we have zero influence over all of the things that are in our sphere of concern. And so you will run yourself crazy if you're continually trying to like tend to all the things that you're concerned about when you have zero influence there. And so start with where you are and with where you do have that influence, and make sure that you're being the best kingdom person that you can be. And if you are in a relationship with someone and it does feel like they are completely out of their mind thinking and believing and saying things, I would say to, like Dan said, if it's safe physically and emotionally and mentally, stick it out. But also don't dehumanize, don't devalue the person. Continue to value them, invest in their humanity, show them love without disdain, in the hopes that there could be some sort of breakthrough, not because you're trying to change their mind, but just because they are valuable as a person, just like we are valuable, right? Like we don't know all the things, we don't have all the things right. And God continues to pour into us and to try to reach us, and he doesn't remove himself from us. So that's, try to let's just remember concern versus influence, and just trying to pour into where we have that influence.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. That's awesome. Well, I have a devotional, and I think this is the first devotional I've ever bought. So I'm very excited about this. I'm
awesome.
I'm entering the devotional stage of my life. So that's a good thing. This is, I'm 4 days. So it's a annual devotional. So it's 365 days, starts January 1st. Well, the rules don't apply to me. Okay. I'm jumping in. I'm starting in January, even though it's the end of May. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just, with that disclaimer, but it's called, Come Alive with Jesus. And Jesse and Kara Berkey wrote it together. And I've read a lot of stuff that Jesse has done, and he's sort of an acquaintance of mine. And so because I really like the stuff that he does, I ended up getting it. Well, it just so happened that on today's devotional, he's looking at James 1:9. And James 1:9 says that, understand this, my beloved brethren, let every man or person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to take offense, and slow to become angry. So that's James 1:9, which is so applicable to everything that Bill is saying. And then this is the devotional part, and this is God speaking to you, and this is how you're supposed to read it. It says this: I love you, and you make me smile. The sound of your laughter is sweet to my ears. Let the work of your hands proclaim my name. Let the words of your mouth honor me. Let my love fill your heart and compel you to express it freely. Be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to forgive. Become unoffendable. I am protecting your heart, and it is secure in me. It is no longer you who live, but I who live through you. Let my life become yours. You are a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, ready to be revealed to the world. Let the world watch as we dance together.
That's beautiful. I
Isn't
just
that great?
closed my eyes. Yeah, I closed my eyes just to soak that in. Thank you, Dan. It's a beautiful nugget. Wonderful way to end the show. And I just want to say thank you for bringing that. Thank you guys for this conversation. And I hope that you will all continue to dive in a little deeper in your own spaces, in your own spheres. And I look forward to chatting with you guys later on. So continue to send in questions, continue to engage, and we will continue to be here in all of our goofiness, but with sincerity. So Thanks, guys. Thanks, Dan. Really good to see you all. Have a great rest of your week.